grave hunters. Today I felt it only necessary, since we are in February, to do a video on the more macabre areas of Valentine's Day. Yes, there's going to be murder, death, corpse love, and a twisted royal plot. So grab your wine, pour a hefty glass as we make our way through my top 5 Killer Valentines. Ching ching, creeps! Also, before we actually get to the real blood, go ahead and slaughter that like button. While you're at it, slaughter that subscribe button so I can keep making you guys some sexy history. Number 1, the Lonely Hearts Killers. What's the saying? Those who kill together stay together. Okay, that might not actually be a saying, but in this case, it is. Now, I'll also say that there are many, and I mean many, a couple that have murdered together. But I chose this case because A, it's older, and B, although awful, it isn't quite as awful as some of the other more recent ones that I would rather not publicize. Moving on, let's set the stage, shall we? We have one, Raymond Fernandez, who we'll be calling Ray, and he's doing some time in prison for some lame-ass petty crimes, but he's using his time wisely learning about the occult and voodoo from his cellmate, and he gets this wicked idea that he can use these newfound powers and learnings to woo women and then to rob them. Now, and I should mention that he did suffer a serious head injury while serving in World War II, which left him with some, let's call them behavioral issues, probably hence the reason he thought he could supernaturally control women. But here's the thing. It's the 1940s, so he's not going to be using social media or some ritual practice to actually lure women to him. No. He's actually writing replies to the lonely women ads in the newspaper. Remember that was a thing? I think they have them on Craigslist, but anyways, things went pretty well for him. Women were biting, and he soon enters a relationship with an older lady, and it lasts just long enough that he can get access to her bank account, which he drains. Of course. The next victim, he actually took on a trip to Spain, where she coincidentally ended up dead. Our second main character appears on the scene shortly after that trip. So, enter one Martha Beck, an overweight woman who has 2 children. She's super lonely, and she puts out an ad in the Lonely Hearts Club, and when her and Ray start seeing each other, a strange thing happens. They fall in love. Although he did not fall in love with her 2 children, so she dropped them off at the Salvation Army. Super. What a good mom. And because they were in love, Ray makes a really interesting decision. And he tells Martha that he had originally had planned to rob her, and then he lets her in on the scheme that he's been running, which I think is just really shocking. And instead of leaving him, she decides to help. And moving forward, they pretended to be brother and sister, even sometimes moving in together with Ray's newest victims. But things don't stay kosher for that long. See, Martha had a bit of a jealous streak, and when she didn't like is when relationships would take too long to get to their end result. Such is the case with their final victim, which in this particular case was a younger woman in Michigan, which she probably wasn't psyched about. And this woman was a little suspicious of the whole brother-sister story. Nevertheless, she lets them both move in with her and her young daughter, but she doesn't agree to marry Ray right away, which is not exactly the plan, and that pisses off Martha because she's getting tired of waiting for her man to be her man again. So they kill the woman and the young daughter, and they bury them in the house basement. Now, this isn't, I should mention, the first murder they've committed. The first one was intentional, the second one was an accidental overdose of an older woman, but they're not new to killing people, that's the point. Long story short, Ray and Martha get caught, and they sign a 73-page confession boasting that they've killed 17 people, although authorities think it was probably more like 4. Anyways, but they think they're safe because they're in Michigan, which is an anti-capital punishment state. What they didn't know is they'd be extradited to New York, where they very much believed in capital punishment. They are both sentenced to death and were executed via the electric chair in Sing Sing prison right after they tried a last-minute insanity plea, which clearly did not work. Now, I'm really tempted to make a joke about like electrifying love here, but you know, I'll just move right past it. Number 2, Marguerite Allain. Now, let's be honest. It wouldn't be me if I didn't find a way to sneak in a little prostitute action to a video. And I gotta be real, Marguerite is an interesting lady. And I also feel like I'm saying her last name wrong, but we're moving past it. She's born in 1890 in Paris to a super poor family, but they attend to the rich. So she at least has the privilege of observing and acquiring rich people hobbies. But not all is fancy in her world. When Marguerite is 15, her 4-year-old brother runs out into the street and gets killed on her watch. Her parents blamed her for this, naturally, and they sent her to a convent. My worst nightmare. She no like the nuns, like I wouldn't either, and they beat her senseless. So she runs away, because that's what you would do if the nuns were beating you. I'd freaking run too. But she gets pregnant at 16. And she can't afford the baby. Baby's daddy isn't in the picture, so she has to give her daughter up and soon turns to a life of prostitution and the occasional nightclub singer. I bet you weren't expecting that one. A little surprise. Well, apparently her sweet vocals and pretty face got her noticed one night by Madame Denart, which I feel like I'm also saying wrong, but she's also a really interesting character, but that's for a whole other video, so we're gonna just have to keep moving on. And she decides to take Marguerite under her wing because she believes she has the makings to be a great courtesan. Turns out she was right, and Marguerite was one of the most requested ladies for aristocrats and royalty, and this is my favorite part. So much so that the royal family sent Prince Edward of Wales, the future freaking king of England, to her to practice his sex skills before getting married. Just take it in. Take it in. And it turns out Edward was so smitten with her that he wrote her tons of erotic letters that she kept because Marguerite was no idiot. And she continues her life of high society back time and makes enough money along with all her sugar daddy treats to afford a fancy apartment in Paris where society ladies and gents had no idea that she was actually a courtesan. And this eventually leads to her first marriage when she was 23 to a man in his 40s. Now, he's super rich and he's nice and he spoils her, but ultimately the age difference was just too much for her to bear. Or so she says. They divorce, she gets a huge settlement, and now she feels like she can finally take care of her daughter. So she sends for her, and now 7-year-old comes to live with her, which I think is sweet. She finally gets her daughter back. That's nice, although she ends up sending her to a boarding school in London, but it was an expensive one. It was nice. Who cares? Anyways, her life of courting rich men and letting them spoil her continues until her trip to Egypt, provided by one of her many men. Marguerite meets a man who will forever change her life. Prince Ali Kamel Famille Bey. Famille Bey, I really don't know, I'm trying so hard, is taken by her beauty. And although nothing happens in Egypt, things definitely happen when they bump back into each other in Paris. He's completely ignorant to the fact that she has a history of being a courtesan, and they have a brief romance before he asks for her hand in marriage. But don't get excited because this won't end well. Now, Marguerite, again, not being an idiot, sees how fast this is, but she calms herself when she thinks about how much money he has, and if things don't work out, they can divorce, just like her last one. But this is different because Bey is Muslim, and he wants her to convert to Islam and move to Egypt. Also, he wants to take on multiple wives. Marguerite agrees to convert and to move, but she draws up a prenup that says she can divorce if it doesn't work out, and she can still wear Western clothes. Bey isn't feeling this, and days before the wedding, he rips up the prenup, and at this point, Marguerite's already in Egypt, she's already converted, and she's there marrying a guy without proof of terms of marriage. Now, I also want to point out that they fight, like a lot, like real heated, real bad fights, so much so she keeps, get this, a hate journal that she writes in every time she's mad at him, which is a lot. And in a brief respite of hate, he agrees to take her to London to go see an opera. It is at the Savoy Hotel at 2:30 in the morning when an argument ensues and Marguerite shoots Bay. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, killing him dead. Except not instantly. It took a while. She clearly was a really bad shot. Also, remember how I mentioned she wasn't an idiot? This is important. Well, this murder was definitely premeditated because if she had killed him in Egypt, she definitely would have been convicted of murder and sentenced to death. But here in London, with those super saucy letters from Edward in her back pocket, she knew she had the ultimate get out of jail card. And it worked. After some heavy blackmail, all charges against Marguerite were dropped. Whoa. So I guess the moral of her story is if you're going to become a Black Widow, do it with some royal blackmail at your disposal. Number 3, Mr. Lee Van. Sometimes those we love are taken from us too soon. Such is the case with Lee Van and his wife. The two had a rocky start. Their marriage was arranged by their parents when they were children. When they wed, they weren't necessarily in love. However, over time, they grew to love each other a lot, like 7 children a lot. Their life was rocky though, because Lee Van, oh little man, he got busted for participating in illegal lotto. So they had to downsize their house, downsize their life, and he had to become a miner that worked far from home. In 2003, he got word of his wife's passing and he pleaded with everyone not to bury her, but he was guilted by the community because their belief was that if you didn't bury the body, then their soul couldn't move on. So he agreed, but check this out. He spent almost a year sleeping on her grave. Finally, with the rainstorm on the way, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. He decided to dig up his wife's corpse so as that she wouldn't get wet from the rain, which is actually kind of really sweet. But then he started worrying about people finding out, what would they think, and so he took her remains and put them in a plastic bag and reburied them. But something in him couldn't let it go, so he brought all the necessary things that you would need to make a statue, like plaster, cement, clay, I don't know, other statue things. And he spent days in the cemetery at the grave creating a statue of his wife. But not because he wanted to make a memorial piece. He was making it, prepare yourself, so he could put his wife's remains inside. And he did. And then he brought her home. And she's been there for 16 years. Despite the community horror and the horror from his children, Lee Van gets to sleep next to his wife every night. He cleans up her statue, he puts makeup on her, and the most sweet, I think, is that he makes her fancy dresses because he couldn't afford them in life. That's pretty sweet. Am I wrong? I think it's pretty sweet. And yes, to some, this is macabre, but for Lee Van, it's a way to still be with his wife, and he plans on sleeping with her every night until he also dies. And I suppose the question is then, what's going to happen to his body when he dies? Number 4, Dolly. Oh, it's Derek. 99% sure I butchered her last name, but you know what? And her lover in the attic. So I'm gonna be honest with you guys. This is a very complex, involved story, so I'm going to give you guys the highlights of this super bizarre, infamous murder/love triangle that happened at the turn of the century in Los Angeles. Also, Dolly's real name is Wahlberga. I don't know, I think that's funny. I think it's a funny name. Dolly, a housewife to Fred, who was the owner of a Milwaukee apron factory, was in her 30s, aka her sexual peak, and her hobby was either never home or too drunk to perform his marital duties, to put it simply. So you can assume that on this particular day in 1913, when her sewing machine broke down, it was just one of many frustrations she was dealing with. Call it kismet, call it irony, foreshadowing, whatever word you want to use, insert it here. But basically, when Fred sent out a repairman to fix the machine, instead of offering to do it himself, he was kind of sort of unintentionally writing his own ending. 17-year-old Otto, the repairman, was probably the walking human equivalent of 50 Shades of Grey for Dolly, and she was prepared when he arrived. She knew this kid worked at her husband's factory, maybe she got a little sneak peek of him at some point, but in any case, when he arrived, she was in nothing but a robe and stockings. So I guess we can ask the question, was the sewing machine ever really broken? Was it illegal that Dolly started a sexual affair with a technical minor? Yes. Is it the worst crime they would commit? Nope. Buckle up, folks, because things are going to go from strange to a hell of a lot stranger. Listen, it was a normal affair at first. Hotels, secret meetings outside the house, and then Dolly got kind of either scared that she'd get caught or perhaps she was getting lazy, so she had Otto come to the house where they had lots of loud sex. But the neighbors could see and they could hear, and they were noticing that it was a strange man and not her husband Fred that was always showing up to the house. Dolly's excuse? It was her vagabond brother. Okay. Finally, Dolly was like, you know, this is super dicey and I don't want to stop rolling around with you, so how about you, oh, I don't know, quit your job and then live in my attic? Now, I'm not sure what kind of like magical vagina Dolly must have had that actually made Otto say yes to this arrangement, but he did. And he freaking lived in that attic and in the hideaways of the house for 5 years, helping her clean and like making bathtub gin and apparently writing mystery novels in the attic at night. What? Then Fred throws a curveball and decides to pack up the household and move to Los Angeles. Dolly, being a forward-thinking woman, picks a house overlooking Sunset Boulevard, but not because of the view, she picks it for the attic. And then she sends Otto ahead of them, so he's tucked in and cozy in the attic right when they get there. I'm not making any of this up, none of it, I swear to God. This is just cliff notes of freaking research. 4 freaking years later of Otto being the damn phantom of this metaphorical opera house, something happens. Something really bad happens. It's August 22nd, 1922, and Fred and Dolly are fighting. Not unusual, but this one is bad, like really bad. So Otto emerges from the attic with 2 freaking pistols. Fred is like, WTF, didn't you work at my factory? And then they start getting in a tumble, they're fighting, whatever, the guns go off. Fred is dead. Dolly and Otto panic, so he locks her in the closet, stages a robbery, takes the key and guns, and goes and hides in the attic and waits for the police. When the cops arrive, they sort of have no choice but to buy the burglary story, mainly because she was locked in the closet from the outside, so she couldn't really have done that. Now, things are about to get really complicated, so bear with me. Dolly buys a new house. Instead of taking her relationship with Otto out into the public, he moves into her new attic, where he stays for pretty much the rest of our entire story. I don't understand this guy's deal, I don't. Things get stranger when Dolly gets a new boyfriend, a lawyer named Herman Shapiro. He also works long hours, making it so Otto and her can carry on their affair, but somehow, some freaking way, this is still not enough man for Dolly, so she takes on a third man, Roy Klum. By some magical way, she convinces Klum to dispose of one of the murder pistols in the La Brea tar pits. Again, this woman must have some sort of like magical vagina. And then through the power of persuasion, and apparently not sex this time, she got her neighbor to bury the other pistol. But scorned lovers have a way of coming back to get you in the ass. So when she decided to get rid of Klum, he then went to the police with the information about the guns, and Dolly was taken into custody. Both pistols were corroded, so they weren't enough to convict her, but while in custody, things get the strangest they're going to get. In complete desperation, Dolly begs Shapiro to bring food to her vagabond brother living in the attic, and instead of being freaked out by this revelation that his lady friend has a man in her attic, he does it. But in the weirdest turn of events, upon seeing Shapiro, aka another man, Otto ends up confiding in him about his entire relationship with Dolly. It's like he was just so excited to have male interaction. And somehow, even this isn't enough to get Shapiro to leave Dolly. He just tells Otto, hey dude, get out of Dodge, she's my woman. And then he gets Dolly released and all charges dropped from jail. So it seems like they got away with it. Until Dolly makes a fatal error 7 years later, when she leaves Shapiro, who in retaliation goes to the police with all the information that he's gathered about the entire case. They have all this evidence, enough to find them guilty, which they do, except the statute of limitations has run out. So they're both free to go. The Batman case is probably one of the most strange cases in LA history, and honestly, just being super truthful here, I feel like Dolly's libido is the real true hero of this story. Power to you, woman. Oh God. Number 5, Carl Tanzler and his real-life corpse bride. Is there anything more tragic than unrequited love? It's a virus that overtakes your entire body, your mind, your emotions, and soon all you can do is dig up your beloved, cover her in wax, and lay her in your living room. Am I right? Maybe I should back it up. Okay, roll with me. Imagine, if you will, a dream. You're a kid and you meet the person you know one day you will marry. The face is forever seared into your consciousness and you spend years of your adulthood hoping to find that person from your dream. But you don't. So you settle and you marry someone else and a little tiny bit of you dies inside. Now, imagine you're 56. You're a doctor in 1930 Key West, Florida, and everyone is coming down with tuberculosis, which is spreading like wildfire throughout the cigar factories. And then she walks through the door. The face you've been searching your entire life for. She's freaking 21, freaking beautiful, and her name is Elena, and she has tuberculosis. Obviously, you have to find a way to cure her and to marry her. So you go to her family, you introduce yourself as Count von Kossel, and say that you have 9 medical diplomas. Never mind the fact that you're not a count, you're just a regularly accredited doctor, and who cares? You're going against all protocol. This is your woman. So you buy her things and you tell her how much you love her. And then she breaks your heart when she tells you, although she's flattered, she'd like you to continue trying to save her life, but, well, she's just not that into you. If that heartbreak wasn't enough, you failed. You couldn't save her, and she freaking dies. But you need to show her that you love her somehow, so you go to her family and you beg them, let me pay for the funeral. Let me make her a big-ass freaking crypt. And then you go and you visit that crypt every day for a year. And everyone thinks, you're just mourning. You're so sad. Little do they know, you found a way to cheat the system, because every night you've gone to her tomb, which you had a key to, and you delicately are preserving her body. Then, under the cover of night, you take her to your super fancy, super ghetto makeshift lab fastened out of an old airplane, and you Frankenstein the hell out of her. Wires get inserted so you can pose her body in all sorts of ways. You put glass eyeballs in because her other eyes, her real ones, have at this point decomposed. You stuff her with rags so she stays shapely. And then you cover her with wax to preserve her skin. And just like that, your bride is alive-ish. Again, you finally got the life you've always been waiting for ever. So you dance with her, you sing to her, you cook for her, you have you make love, you are romantic with her, and every night you get to crawl into bed with your bride and you get to live in this wedded bliss for 10 years. Then your sister-in-law comes for a visit because she's heard rumors in town that you've been buying perfume and ladies' clothing, and shadows of you dancing with a woman in your house have been seen. So she wants to come in and check on the good older doctor who's clearly found a woman that tried so hard to save her sister, your wife, who she sees in all her glory. waxy Glory, and for some unspeakable reason, she's horrified. You get arrested for I don't know why, and then you're tested for psychiatric health, but they determine what you already knew, which is you're freaking fine, but then you get put on trial for, and I quote, wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. The jury has pity for you because everyone knows what it feels like when you want somebody so badly that you're driven to extremes. So they set you free, and you're ballsy enough. You're ballsy enough to ask for her body back. And when they say no and rebury her in an unmarked grave so you or other people can't get her, you're bummed, but you're also smart, so you rebuild a life-size doll fastened in her memory. And you live with that until you die. Because creeps, true love never dies. Happy Valentine's Day!